Hello, I'm Martin, your host for Short Stories. Today's short story is based on a novel written by Jane Austen, Emma. Jane Austen published this book in 1816. It was her fourth novel and the last to be published while she was still alive. It tells the story of a nosy aristocrat who thinks she is a perfect matchmaker. Her meddling leads to broken hearts and some personal reflection. Why does this book keep getting made into films and TV shows? I personally do not like this story, but like all Jane Austen books, it has developed a cult following. I guess some people like to imagine themselves in Jane Austen's romantic world. The full version of the story can be very confusing. There are a lot of characters with crisscrossing relationships to each other. The version you are about to hear has been abridged and simplified, and it only covers Volume 1. If you feel brave enough to read the full version, you can find it on Gutenberg.org. By the way, I used AI to generate the images for this video, but I'd much rather get pictures from students. If you'd like to contribute pictures for short story videos, please see me at the Language Center offices. Thank you. Vocabulary. Set up. Set up. Julie tried to set up Jane and John. Matchmaker. Matchmaker. Jim and Jane met through a matchmaker. Date. Date. Jim and Jane dated for 3 years before they got married. Hit it off. Hit it off. Jim and Jane hit it off right away. Standoffish. Standoffish. Jane didn't like John because he was too standoffish. Have, or got, the hots for someone. Have the hots for someone. Jim has the hots for Jane. Break up. Break up. Jim broke up with Jill to marry Jane. Machinations. Machinations. Thanks to Julie's machinations, Jim broke up with his girlfriend. The story. Emma Woodhouse, handsome, clever, and rich, with a comfortable home and happy disposition, had lived nearly 21 years in the world with very little to distress or vex her. She lived with her indulgent father in a fine old house in the village of Highbury. It seemed that Emma had a truly blessed life. Her only real problem was that she got her own way a little too often. This caused her to think a little too well of herself. These were the disadvantages that threatened Emma Woodhouse's happiness. One day Emma and her father were talking. "I wish your sister was still here. It's a pity that she got married," said Mr. Woodhouse. Emma replied, "I cannot agree with you, Papa. Isabel's husband is a very good-humored, pleasant, and excellent man. I set them up, you know." Her father huffed and said, "You were always good at arranging things." Suddenly, Emma had a terrible idea. "I would be a great matchmaker," she thought to herself. Emma had a friend named Harriet Smith. She was dating a local farmer named Robert Martin. But in Emma's mind, this was not a good match for her. "A farmer is much too beneath you, Harriet," said Emma. "You need someone with higher status. Why not marry Mr. Elton? He's the town vicar." Harriet furrowed her brows and said, "To be sure, Mr. Elton is a fine young man, but I've been seeing Mr. Martin for a while now, and—" Emma interjected, "You have made no commitment to Mr. Martin, and besides, you haven't even met Mr. Elton yet. I'm hosting a party this weekend. Why don't you come? I'll introduce you." Emma Woodhouse was known to host very dignified and elegant parties. All of Highbury's elite were invited: Mr. Knightley, Mr. Elton, Mr. Weston, and so on. Emma introduced Harriet to Mr. Elton at the party. They seemed to hit it off. Later, Emma talked to Harriet about the meeting. "So what did you think of Mr. Elton?" asked Emma. "He seemed very gentlemanly, just as you said he would be, but he was a little standoffish," Harriet said. "I know," replied Emma. "Isn't he great? He'll be a very important member of society one day, not like that peasant, Mr. Martin." Harriet looked solemn for a second and said, "I guess you're right." Harriet was very pretty and amiable, but not very clever. This made her easy to manipulate, which is probably why Emma liked her in the first place. The following day, Emma met with Mr. Elton to get his opinion. "What did you think of Miss Smith? She's quite a catch, don't you think?" Mr. Elton pressed his lips together and said, "Not really. She's nice and all, but she's a commoner, really." Emma was a bit shocked by this. "Are you talking about Harriet Smith and not another Miss Smith?" she asked him. "She was the only Smith there. Besides, why are you going on about Miss Smith when it's you and me we should be talking about?" said Mr. Elton as he made eyes at Emma. "What do you mean?" asked Emma. "Isn't it obvious?" replied Mr. Elton. "You've got the hots for me." Emma tried to explain the situation to Mr. Elton. She was not romantically interested in him at all. "Then why did you invite me to your party?" complained Mr. Elton. Emma felt embarrassed, but her feelings became worse a few hours later when she met Harriet. "I have good news, Emma," declared Harriet. "I have followed your advice. I broke up with Mr. Martin this morning." Emma tried to play it cool. "Oh, did you? That's nice," she said through a nervous smile. They talked for a little while longer, but Emma did not say anything about her conversation with Mr. Elton. It was only later, when she went to ask Mr. Elton out on a date, that Harriet learned his true feelings. Harriet's heart was broken. She had thrown away her relationship with a good man for a snob who didn't want anything to do with her. The next day, Mr. Knightley came to the Woodhouse Manor for a visit. Mr. Knightley was a neighbor and close friend of the Woodhouse family. He had known them since he was a child. He sat down with Emma and Mr. Woodhouse for a chat. "Why don't you go for a walk, Papa?" suggested Emma. Mr. Woodhouse mumbled, "Well, if you excuse me, Mr. Knightley, I shall take Emma's advice." Once Mr. Woodhouse left the room, the tone of the conversation changed. "Aren't you ashamed of yourself, Emma?" asked Mr. Knightley. Emma gasped and said, "I don't know what you're talking about. How dare you speak to me in that way?" Mr. Knightley leaned closer and said, "I know what you did to poor Miss Smith. You broke her heart, Emma Woodhouse." Emma became very defensive and replied, "What? I broke her heart? I'm pretty sure it was that awful Mr. Elton." But Mr. Knightley was not convinced. He knew Emma very well, and he knew that Harriet Smith had been harmed by her machinations. Mr. Knightley's arguments began to affect Emma. Her heart sank. "What have I done?" said Emma. That evening, after Emma had curled her hair and sent her maid away, she thought about all the events and decisions that led up to the heartbreak of Harriet Smith. The thought of Harriet crying alone made Emma's own heart ache. "There must be something I can do to fix this," she said to herself. "Maybe I can fix her up with William Cox." Emma stopped herself mid-thought and said, "No, I can't start matchmaking again. That's how this whole mess started in the first place." Emma went to bed without finding an answer. When Emma woke up the next morning, she was greeted by the sight of glistening snowdrifts. "It looks like we'll be staying indoors today," Emma told her father. At around lunchtime, Emma heard a knock at the door. It was Mr. Knightley. "What are you doing out in this awful weather?" she asked him. "No weather can keep me away," replied Mr. Knightley. "Besides," he continued, "I want to continue our conversation from yesterday." Emma let him in and gave him a warm cup of tea. After some discussion, they came to the conclusion that Emma had to go to Harriet and try her best to repair the emotional damage. The questions. Number 1. What is the cause of all of Emma's troubles? A. Herself. B. Her father. C. Her poverty. D. Her low status. The answer is A. Herself. Question 2. Which word best describes Harriet Smith? A. Clever. B. Rich. C. Serious. D. Friendly. The answer is D. Friendly. Remember, she is described as pretty and amiable. Amiable means friendly. Question 3. What was the misunderstanding between Emma and Mr. Elton? A. Mr. Elton thought Emma was interested in him. B. Emma thought Mr. Elton was already married. C. Emma thought Mr. Elton was interested in her. D. Emma thought Mr. Elton was interested in Mr. Knightley. The answer is A. Mr. Elton thought Emma was interested in him. Question 4. What is Emma likely to do next? A. She will do nothing. B. She will host another party. C. She will visit Harriet and try to cheer her up. D. She will give Mr. Elton a piece of her mind. The answer is C. She will visit Harriet and try to cheer her up.